The Force is light and full of shadows.
Before we dive in, check the link in the description if you want exclusive Timelines members-only videos you won't find on YouTube, all on our Patreon. The light arrives before anything else does. Not the warm amber light of Tatooine's twin suns, something older than that. Something that has no business existing in a desert at the edge of the galaxy, blazing down from a cloudless sky onto a world that has forgotten what miracles feel like. This light comes from within. From the space between heartbeats, from the long, breathless dark between one life ending and whatever comes after. It lasts exactly 3 seconds. Then, it is gone, and 2 men are lying face down in the sand. The heat hits Obi-Wan Kenobi first. Not the cold of the void, not the strange, weightless peace he had felt for what might have been seconds or centuries in the cosmic force's embrace. Heat, immediate, merciless, pressing against his cheek through the sand like a hand refusing to be ignored. He draws a breath. It scrapes down a throat he had forgotten he possessed. His fingers curl. Sand compresses beneath them, coarse, red gold, smelling of iron and dust, and something faintly petrochemical carried on a wind that shouldn't exist this far into the outer rim's dead belt. He knows this smell. He has been here before, a long time ago, when he was younger and more certain about what certainty meant. He pushes himself upright. Every muscle protests. Not with the specific complaints of an old man's body. He had died at 57, and he is aware, with a clarity that arrives slowly and then all at once, that the body he is inhabiting now does not feel 57. It feels. He flexes his hands, turns them over, looks at the lean forearms below the rolled sleeves of robes he does not remember choosing. It feels like 40. Maybe less. The Force has not returned him as the desert hermit he became. It has returned him as the man he was before he retreated into one. He becomes aware of the second flare of presence in the Force before he turns around. Bright, ashingly, almost painfully bright, the way looking directly at a sun feels before your eyes understand what they're doing and flinch away. He had forgotten what it felt like to stand next to this particular light. He had spent years trying to remember it, and years trying to forget it, and here it is again, radiating out of the man now sitting up in the sand 6 meters to his left, blinking at his own hands with an expression of complete bewilderment. Anakin Skywalker is alive, not the black armored shadow, not the ruined thing gasping its last words on the hangar floor of a station that was already dying, the light of its own destruction coming through the open bay doors. Not the luminous, smiling ghost who had stood with Yoda and Qui-Gon at the edge of a bonfire celebration Obi-Wan had watched from a distance, already trying to understand what he felt. Alive, solid, a body with weight and breath, and a jaw that is tightening the way it always did, when Anakin was trying to process something faster than his mind could move. Obi-Wan watches him look at his hands, at the sand, at the twin suns overhead. Tatooine, Anakin says. His voice is rough from disuse, from no use, technically, for however long they were wherever they were. He tests the word again. Quieter. Tatooine. Yes, Obi-Wan says. Anakin turns. They look at each other across 6 meters of red gold desert. Something passes between them that has no name and needs none. 23 years of shared history, of failure and love and catastrophic loss, and a single redemptive moment on the threshold of death. It doesn't arrange itself into language. It doesn't need to. The Force hums between them low and steady, the way it does when 2 things that belong together are, for the first time in a long time, in the same place, at the same moment. Anakin stands. He is taller than Obi-Wan remembered, or perhaps he is simply no longer hunched inside armor designed to keep him breathing rather than let him move. He straightens to his full height in the desert wind, and for a moment he looks less like a man, and more like something the suns carved out of the land itself. How much do we remember? Anakin asks. Everything, Obi-Wan says. I believe that was intentional. Anakin nods once. Slowly he turns, scanning the horizon with the same tactical sweep that used to precede every combat assessment. Old habits. The desert offers up nothing but dunes and distance, and a vague brown smudge on the horizon that might be a settlement. Mos Espa, Obi-Wan says, following his gaze. That direction, I think. 2 hours on foot, perhaps less. You've been here before. Briefly, I was. He stops. The grammar of the past is treacherous here. Was, am, will be. I accompanied Qui-Gon. The first time. He pauses to let that settle. This is before that. We're before that. Anakin goes very still. The wind moves between them. Sand ticks against Obi-Wan's boots. How far before? Anakin's voice is careful. Controlled. A man who has learned, in the hardest possible classroom, what happens when he stops being careful. Weeks, I believe. Perhaps a month or two at most. The blockade of Naboo hasn't begun. Qui-Gon is likely on Coruscant or already en route with you, he catches himself. With the mission. Anakin looks at the smudge on the horizon. His jaw works. He's there, Anakin says. Not a question. In Mos Espa. Yes, a 9-year-old boy. Likely running a parts errand for Watto. Obi-Wan keeps his voice level. He has had a few more seconds to prepare for this particular reality, and is still not remotely prepared for it. He cannot imagine what it does to Anakin. He will not insult him by pretending it's simple. Anakin doesn't respond for a long moment. We need a cover, he says at last. Guardians of the Wills, Obi-Wan says. Wandering mystics. Enough truth to be convincing. Enough distance from the Council to avoid questions we can't answer. Names, Ben, Obi-Wan says it without hesitation. The word fits in his mouth with an ease that surprises him. A name from his future past. A name he spent 19 years answering to on a desert not unlike this one, and it is available here, in this moment, as both a disguise and, in some way he doesn't fully examine, a homecoming. You? Anakin is quiet for a moment. Sky, he says. Something shifts in his expression. It'll do. Obi-Wan nods. He does not reach out with the Force, not yet, not here in the open. Not until they understand what can be felt and by whom. Instead, he reaches into the robe he is wearing and finds, with a shock that runs the length of his spine, the weight of a lightsaber on his belt. He draws it, examines it. The casing is different from the one that fell into the dark on Naboo, different from the one he used on Mustafar, different from the weathered instrument of his desert years. It is something older and newer at once, as though the Force assembled it from memory rather than manufacture. He ignites it. The blue blade climbs into the desert air, humming with a familiar resonance, and the sound of it does something to his chest that he will not attempt to describe. Anakin ignites his own. Blue as well. Not red. Not the red that had meant, for so long, everything broken about him. Blue, the color of the blade he'd carried as Obi-Wan's apprentice, the color of the man he might have been if the river had run differently. He stares at it for 3 full seconds. Then he extinguishes it, clips it to his belt, and turns back to the horizon. We should move, he says, before those suns get any worse. Obi-Wan extinguishes his own blade, falls into step beside him. They walk in silence for a while, 2 men built from the wreckage of a history they have come here to prevent. The sand shifts under their feet. The twin suns climb. Mos Espa's brown smudge resolves by degrees into shapes, low rooftops, moisture evaporators, the skeletal geometry of a settlement that survives on the edge of nothing through sheer accumulated stubbornness. Somewhere in there, a 9-year-old boy is doing the ordinary work of a slave's mourning. Obi-Wan does not look at Anakin. Anakin does not look at Obi-Wan. They both know what is waiting for them in that town. They both know the weight of it. There are no words adequate to the moment, and they are both men who have lived long enough to understand that the absence of adequate words is not a silence you fill. It is a silence you carry, together, 1 step at a time, across the sand. Mos Espa smells like engine grease and desperation. The market district breathes in cycles. The morning rush of traders and moisture farmers and hut, affiliated middlemen jostling through alleys barely wide enough for 2 humans abreast. Then the midday lull when the twin suns drive every living thing into whatever shade it can find. Then the slow afternoon resurrection, when the heat becomes merely punishing, rather than lethal. They arrive in the morning rush. The crowd closes around them like water around stones, indifferent, preoccupied, loud in 6 languages simultaneously. Obi-Wan had forgotten how much of the galaxy looks like this. Not like Senate chambers, or Jedi briefing rooms, or the clean geometric corridors of a Star Destroyer. Like this, chaotic, unwashed, alive in the most animal sense of the word. Every being in it trying to extract one more day of survival from circumstances that were not designed with their comfort in mind. He had spent 19 years in a desert learning to see this kind of life clearly. He sees it now. Anakin sees none of it. He walks at Obi-Wan's shoulder, steady and present and entirely elsewhere. His eyes move across the market with the mechanical sweep of a man running threat assessments by reflex, but Obi-Wan can feel where his actual attention is anchored. It is pulling forward through the crowd towards something he hasn't seen yet, the way a compass needle pulls toward a pole it cannot resist. The Force, recognizing its own. Easy, Obi-Wan says quietly. Not a reprimand. Just a word. Anakin exhales. I know. They navigate by Obi-Wan's memory, which is imperfect. He had passed through Mos Espa once, briefly, and as a 25-year-old Padawan more focused on keeping Qui-Gon in his eyeline than on cataloging street layouts. But memory and the Force together are sufficient. They find Watto's junk shop on the 3rd attempt. Tucked between a Rodian-run coolant dealer and a stall selling what appears to be dried protein strips of deeply ambiguous origin. Watto is outside, haggling with the Duros in terms that seem to be deteriorating rapidly for the Duros' side. He is exactly as Anakin remembered, squat, blue-gray, the leather of his wings catching the morning light. His snout creased with mercantile disdain that functions as his default resting expression. The sight of him lands differently for each of them. For Obi-Wan, a piece of old history seen from outside the story. For Anakin, the man who owned him. He keeps his face empty. He is very good at that. Excuse me, Obi-Wan says, stepping into the Duros' line of retreat with the specific confidence of a man who assumes his own authority so naturally that others tend to concede it before examining whether they should. We're looking for the boy. Anakin, Watto turns. His eyes find them both, perform a rapid economic calculation, and settle into cautious interest. 2 humans in good robes are either trouble or money, and Watto has always been better at finding money than avoiding trouble. You know the boy? We know of him, Obi-Wan says. We're interested in his future. The negotiation takes 40 minutes. Obi-Wan handles it. Not because Anakin is incapable. He had spent years as a general managing supply chains more complex than one Toydarian junk dealer. But because the 2 of them had agreed, wordlessly, during the walk through the market, that Anakin should not be the one speaking to the man who once decided his mother's working hours. There are things a person can control and things they cannot, and the line between them is not always visible until it's been crossed. Obi-Wan has no credits. This turns out to be, for a Jedi, a logistical problem rather than a terminal one. He uses the Force with the same calm precision a surgeon uses a scalpel, not a bludgeon, not a trick, just a quiet nudge against the specific frequency of Watto's greed. The Toydarian's natural resistance to Jedi mind influence is real and well documented, which is why Obi-Wan does not attempt a mind trick. He simply negotiates. He has information Watto doesn't. The precise value of the hyperdrive components currently collecting dust in the far corner of the shop, the going rate on Coruscant's secondary market, and the quiet authority of a man who has nothing to lose and knows it. By the end of the 40 minutes, Watto has accepted a promissory arrangement against a Jedi Temple account Obi-Wan has no current access to and will need to explain later. The manumission papers are signed on a datapad the Toydarian keeps under his wing for exactly this kind of transaction, which tells Obi-Wan everything he needs to know about how often Watto has been in this position before. He frees Shmi first, then Anakin. Both of them. Together, the way it should have been done a decade earlier by someone with the means and the will to do it. Shmi Skywalker does not cry when Obi-Wan hands her the datapad. She reads it. Reads it again. Her hand goes flat against the workbench beside her to keep herself upright, and her lips pressed together in the tight, inward way of a woman who has spent 9 years ensuring her son never saw her break, and that habit has become structural. She is perhaps 40. She looks older in the way that hard labor makes a person older, not decayed, but compressed. Every softness traded in for something more durable. Anakin is standing in the doorway of the back room. He had seen her through the window of the shop before Obi-Wan went in to negotiate. Had stopped walking. Had put one hand against the wall. Had stood there for 30 seconds with his back to Obi-Wan before he said, very quietly, "Give me a moment." And Obi-Wan had said, "Take what you need," and looked in the opposite direction. He is composed now. Barely, Shmi looks up from the datapad and sees the two strangers her son has apparently arrived with, and her eyes move across them both with a mother's specific, exhausting vigilance, reading threat, reading intention, reading the gap between what people present and what they are. Whatever she finds in Obi-Wan apparently satisfies her. Then she looks at Anakin. Something moves across her face. Not recognition. She has never seen this man, but something adjacent to it. Something the Force does sometimes between people whose threads are wound together more tightly than they know. "You look," she says slowly, "like someone who has had a very long journey." "Yes," Anakin says. His voice is under strict control, and the effort is visible. "If you know where to look." "We have." A beat of silence. The sounds of the market filter through the shop's thin walls, Watto outside resuming his argument with the Duros, somewhere a child shouting, the low thrum of a passing speeder. "Mom," a different voice says. And then young Anakin Skywalker is standing in the interior doorway, a hydrospanner in one hand, 9 years old, covered in machine grease up to both elbows. Looking between the strangers and his mother with the specific wariness of a child who has learned that unexpected visitors usually mean something is about to change, and change is not always good. He is small. He is so desperately, achingly small. Adult Anakin looks at him with an expression that has absolutely nothing behind it, because the alternative would be everything, all at once. And this is not the place, and there is no version of now in which he can afford that. He counts the boy's features the way you count the features of someone you thought you'd lost. The jaw, the eyes, the way he holds the hydrospanner like he's forgotten he's holding it. He was this. He was exactly this. Somewhere under all the years of Sith and armor and ash. This child survived in him long enough to matter in the end. "These men have something to tell you," Shmi says to her son, her voice careful, watching him. Then, to Obi-Wan, "Tell him gently." "Always," Obi-Wan says. Young Anakin looks at his mother, looks at the strangers. His eyes settle, without apparent reason, on the tall one, the one who hasn't spoken yet, who is standing slightly apart from the other like a man maintaining a careful and necessary distance from something he wants badly to move toward. "Are you Jedi?" young Anakin asks. Adult Anakin opens his mouth, closes it. "Something like that," Obi-Wan says. The boy looks at the tall stranger for another moment, unsatisfied with that answer in the way only a child can be unsatisfied. Completely. Openly. Without any social mechanism to pretend otherwise. Then he looks at his mother again, and sees something in her face that he has never seen before, the specific quality of relief that arrives only when a thing you stopped hoping for finally, impossibly, happens. He looks back at the strangers. His chin comes up. "You freed her," he says. "Not a question." "Both of you," Obi-Wan says. Young Anakin is quiet for a long moment. The hydrospanner hangs forgotten in his grip. "Okay," he says at last, with the studied nonchalance of a 9-year-old trying very hard not to cry in front of people he doesn't know yet. Adult Anakin turns away. He walks 3 steps to the shop's single small window and stands looking out at the street. At nothing. At the twin suns burning above Mos Espa's rooftops. At everything in this world that is still, for one more month, uncorrupted and intact. His shoulders are perfectly still. He does not make a sound. Coruscant at night looks like someone tipped the stars downward. The planet city sprawls in every direction beneath the landing platform, tier upon tier of light descending into depths that haven't seen natural darkness in 3,000 years. Traffic lanes thread between towers and slow, luminous rivers. The air smells of recycled atmosphere and ion exhaust, and underneath both, something ancient and metallic that is simply the smell of too many beings in too small a space for too long a time. Obi-Wan stands at the platform's edge and does not look at the city. He looks at the temple. It rises to the southwest, its 5 spires catching the ambient light of 10 billion lives and giving nothing back. Austere, immovable, the physical expression of an institution that has confused stillness with wisdom. For so long it has forgotten there is a difference. He has not seen it in 19 years. He had not let himself think about what it would feel like to see it again. It feels, he discovers, like looking at a photograph of someone who died young. Behind him, Anakin is inside the quarters the temple's hospitality staff, confused by their arrival, uncertain of their credentials, ultimately overruled by a pair of council members who decided the 2 strangers who had freed 2 slaves on Tatooine and arrived on Coruscant asking for an audience warranted at least a room, had assigned them on the temple's outer residential ring. Anakin has barely spoken since Mos Espa, not because he is broken, because he is processing, in the way he has always processed the things that matter most, alone, internally, with a thoroughness that looks from outside like absence. Obi-Wan understands. He is doing something similar. He is preparing. Because tomorrow morning they have a meeting with the Jedi Council. And somewhere in this building, at this very moment, Qui-Gon Jinn is alive. He finds him by accident. Or the Force finds them for each other, which is the same thing dressed differently. Obi-Wan is walking, not with purpose, just walking, using the temple's familiar geometry to quiet a mind that refuses to quiet any other way. Through the corridor that runs along the Eastern Archive Annex when he rounds a corner and nearly collides with a man carrying a stack of mission reports under one arm and a cup of something hot in the other hand, and wearing an expression of cheerful distraction that is so specific, so absolutely his, that Obi-Wan's body stops moving before his mind has finished recognizing what it's seeing. Qui-Gon Jinn catches his cup, barely looks up. He is not yet 50, closer to 47, 48, the gray threading through the beard still outnumbered by the darker strands beneath it, arriving, but not yet arrived. Tall in the way that Obi-Wan, at his own worst, forgot anyone could simply be tall, not imposingly, not performatively, just tall, with the ease of a man who has been at peace with his own dimensions for a long time. The beard is there, the long hair. The particular quality of attention in his eyes that Obi-Wan spent his entire apprenticeship trying to earn, and his entire exile understanding he had already had. "My apologies," Qui-Gon says, with the instinctive courtesy of a man whose default mode is graciousness. "I wasn't watching where he pauses. His eyes settle on Obi-Wan with the same attentiveness the living force always produced in him, not scanning, not evaluating, simply receiving, the way a still pool receives a stone. "You're one of the arrivals. The Guardians. Ben," Obi-Wan says. The name comes out steady. He is very proud of that. "Yes, Qui-Gon Jinn." He shifts the reports under his arm and extends a hand. Obi-Wan shakes it. "The council mentioned you'd arrived. Unusual circumstances, they said, which from the council usually means they're worried and don't want to admit it." "That's been my experience as well," Obi-Wan says, and something in his voice, not the words, but the specific frequency of dry amusement beneath them, makes Qui-Gon look at him more carefully. "Have we met?" Qui-Gon asks. "You seem," he stops, turns the feeling over, examining it the way he always examined things the Force put in front of him, without rushing toward a conclusion. "Familiar? No," Obi-Wan says. "We haven't met. Both of those statements are true. Neither of them is the whole truth." He holds Qui-Gon's gaze and allows himself for exactly 3 seconds to simply look at his master's face, to confirm that the laugh lines are there, the gray threading through the beard, the specific warmth in the eyes that no amount of Jedi composure ever fully contained, to confirm that he is breathing. 3 seconds. Then, he looks away. "I understand you're to address the council tomorrow," Qui-Gon says, falling into step beside him with the naturalness of a man who treats every stranger as a conversation he hasn't finished yet. "They won't make it easy. Mace Windu is suspicious of anything he didn't generate himself, and the others follow his lead more than they admit. I'm aware of the Council's dynamics. A beat. Qui-Gon glances at him sideways. You're very well informed for a wandering mystic. We've been wandering a long time, Obi-Wan says. They walk in silence for a moment. The corridor is empty this late, their footsteps the only sound. The temple hums beneath them with the low, omnipresent resonance of thousands of force-sensitive beings at rest, dreaming, meditating, existing within the same ancient walls. The boy, Qui-Gon says. Young Anakin. The Council has him in assessment, preliminary, nothing formal. His midi-chlorian count has them. He searches for the word. Unsettled. He's not a threat, Obi-Wan says, more quickly than he intends. Qui-Gon looks at him again. The look lasts longer this time. No, he's not. He's a 9-year-old child with extraordinary potential and absolutely no framework for it, which is either a great gift or a serious problem depending entirely on how the Order chooses to respond. A pause. I've been arguing for the latter interpretation. The Council prefers to be uncertain in committee rather than decisive alone. That sounds right, Obi-Wan says, and then has to stop walking for a moment under the pretense of adjusting the clasp on his robe, because the specific combination of hearing Qui-Gon say that, hearing him argue for young Anakin's acceptance in exactly the terms Obi-Wan had spent decades knowing he'd used, in this corridor, at this hour, when there is no Naboo, no blockade, no countdown to a duel that should never have happened, he breathes. Qui-Gon waits. He is exceptional at waiting. You're going to fight for him, Obi-Wan says when he can say it evenly, regardless of what the Council decides. I tend to do that, Qui-Gon admits, with a slight smile that carries the specific weight of a man who has been told this about himself before, by people he respected, and has chosen to remain exactly who he is anyway. It's caused me no end of difficulty. I know. The words land softer than he meant them to. Qui-Gon hears the softness and doesn't remark on it, which is exactly what Obi-Wan would have predicted, and the predictability of it, the sheer, ordinary, devastating predictability of his master being exactly himself, is the thing that nearly undoes him completely. Get some rest, Qui-Gon says. The Council keeps early hours and they prefer their guests to arrive looking like they slept rather than like they've been arguing with ghosts all night. He starts to move away. Master Jinn, Obi-Wan says. Qui-Gon turns. There are 100 things. An entire life's worth of unsaid things. Things that became unsayable on a Theed power generator floor. Things Obi-Wan had carried so long they had stopped feeling like words and started feeling like weather. Like the permanent atmospheric condition of being the person he had become. He has thought, sometimes, in the desert, in the long Tatooine nights, of what he would say if he had the chance. He always thought he would have more when the moment came. He has nothing. Thank you, he says, for the advice. Qui-Gon holds his gaze for a moment. Something moves through his expression, not quite recognition, not quite confusion. Something in the middle. Something the living force is doing that neither of them can fully account for. Of course, Qui-Gon says quietly, he rounds the corner. He is gone. Obi-Wan stands in the empty corridor for a long time. The temple breathes around him. Somewhere deep in the residential wing, a door opens and closes. Somewhere above him, the 5 spires rise into Coruscant's amber-lit night sky, indifferent and eternal. He presses his back against the corridor wall, closes his eyes, does not make a sound. Tomorrow he will walk into the High Council chamber and argue for a future this institution nearly destroyed. Tonight he is a man who just shook hands with a ghost who doesn't know he's supposed to be one. The Force hums around him, patient and enormous and entirely without comfort. He breathes through it. That will have to be enough. The intel arrives through Qui-Gon. Not officially. The Council has not yet decided what to do with the 2 Guardians who appeared from nowhere carrying impossible knowledge, and freed a slave family on Tatooine with a temple account number Mace Windu spent 2 days verifying before admitting, with the specific pained expression of a man who hates being wrong, that it was legitimate. But Qui-Gon has never needed official channels to act on what the Force shows him, and what the Force shows him, what the Guardians told him in careful, calibrated fragments, is that a Sith assassin is moving through the mid-rim toward Naboo, on a vector that will intersect with a diplomatic mission that hasn't departed yet, but will. He comes to their quarters at dawn with the coordinates, and a look on his face that is not quite trust and not quite doubt, but something forged from both. "I don't know how you know what you know," he tells them, standing in the doorway with the early light of Coruscant's artificial dawn behind him. "The Council is still debating whether to believe you exist, but the Force has been." He pauses. "Loud. These past few days. About the two of you." "Loud," Anakin repeats. From the chair in the corner where he has apparently been sitting since before dawn, still and watchful in the way he gets, when something requires his full interior attention. "Insistent," Qui-Gon says, which is the living Force practitioner's version of the same thing. He holds out the coordinates on a datapad. "If you're right about this assassin," "We are," Obi-Wan says, "then I should come with you." "No," they say together. Qui-Gon looks between them. Decides, with the grace of a man who trusts the Force more than his own preferences, not to push. He hands over the datapad. He leaves without another word. Obi-Wan looks at Anakin. Anakin is already standing. Maul's ship is a Sith infiltrator. Needle dark, angular, built for speed and concealment rather than comfort. It sits in a private docking bay on Coruscant's lower levels that officially belongs to a shell company with no employees and 3 levels of HUD-adjacent financial camouflage between it and any name worth knowing. They find it because Anakin spent 2 decades serving the man who built this network. And old architecture doesn't change just because you've stopped living in it. The bay is dim. The ship exhales a faint heat shimmer from its still warm engines, recently arrived, or recently prepped to depart, or both. Crates of generic cargo line the walls as cover. 2 exits, one above on the catwalk level, one behind them where they came in. Obi-Wan notes them both without appearing to. "He's here," Anakin says quietly. "Yes. Already knows we're here too. Probably since we came through the door." A beat of stillness. The kind that precedes a particular kind of violence, not the stillness of peace, but the stillness of 2 forces calculating distance at the same moment. Then the shadows at the far end of the bay simply produce Maul. He lands from the catwalk above in a crouch, 12 meters away, and rises from it in one fluid motion that costs him nothing. He is 22 years old and has been honed since infancy into the purest physical expression of Sith philosophy, the body as weapon, pain as fuel, darkness as identity, rather than choice. He is magnificent in the way a drawn blade is magnificent, entirely and only itself. His lightsaber ignites. Both blades, twin crimson, twin hum. He looks at them across the hold. "2," he says, with the voice of someone who expected one and finds the revision mildly interesting. His yellow eyes move between them, reading, cataloging. His gaze snags on Anakin and stays there a half-second longer than it should, some instinct in him recognizing a quality of darkness he cannot name, the deep structural darkness of a man who has lived in it, breathed it, served it for 20 years, even if none of it shows on his face right now. "You feel wrong," he tells Anakin. "I've been told," Anakin says, and ignites his blade. Maul comes fast, and without announcement, which is his way. No monologue, no ceremony, just the full immediate commitment of a weapon being thrown. He crosses 12 meters in less time than it should be physically possible to cross 12 meters, both blades rotating into a high horizontal sweep, aimed at taking Obi-Wan's head and turning in the same motion to bring the second blade across Anakin's midsection. It is a genuinely extraordinary opening combination. Against 2 ordinary Jedi it would have ended the fight. Obi-Wan steps inside it. Not back. Not sideways. Into it, the Seresu principle at its most distilled, the form's fundamental heresy against every aggressive instinct, letting Maul's momentum carry the sweep through the space Obi-Wan's head just vacated, and bringing his own blade up in a tight economical guard that redirects rather than blocks, bleeding the force of the strike sideways. The second blade meant for Anakin finds nothing, because Anakin is no longer where he was. He has moved laterally, wide, using the architecture of the hold to create an angle. Maul recalculates. It takes him a fraction of a second. That fraction is visible. That is new information. Maul is fast. Faster than expected. Faster than the sparse Jedi records of his existence had suggested. But he has never fought anyone who was not, on some level, afraid of him. Fear changes how people move. It makes them reactive, late, slightly mistimed. It is the invisible variable he has been calibrated against his entire life. Neither of his opponents is afraid. He pushes harder. Obi-Wan absorbs it. This is Ceresu in its final complete form. Not the partial commitment of a 25-year-old Padawan relying on Qui-Gon to carry the fight's weight, but the fully realized defensive art of a man who spent 20 years in a desert, distilling the form to its irreducible core. He doesn't attempt to wound Maul. He contains him. He manages space like a sculptor manages negative space, deliberately, completely, making the ground around him work. Every strike that comes in finds a guard already positioned. Every combination that builds finds its final beat redirected into empty air. Maul begins attacking harder, faster, with the mounting frustration of something that has always resolved difficulty with more force. Anakin closes from the side. Gemso is a counter-attacking form. It absorbs incoming power and returns it amplified, converting the opponent's aggression into the practitioner's advantage. In Anakin's hands, in the middle of this dim cargo hold, it is something beyond a lightsaber technique. It is the full force of a man who has spent 2 decades carrying the weight of a war he started, and every strike carries that weight. Not rage, not darkness. Weight, the distinction matters enormously. Maul is pushed back 2 meters before he fully understands what's happening. He feints high, rolls under Anakin's answer, comes up trying to bisect the space between them with a spinning horizontal sweep that forces them both to disengage. He gains 2 seconds and uses them to put the Sith infiltrator's landing strut between him and Obi-Wan. "Who are you?" he says, not asked. Demanded. His breathing has changed, not labored, not yet, but changed, which represents a data point that clearly disturbs him. "No one you've met," Anakin says. "No one you'll report to Sidious," Obi-Wan adds. The name lands like a physical blow. Maul's yellow eyes go sharp and still. "That name," he says very quietly, "is not something you should know. We know considerably more than that," Obi-Wan says. "That's rather the problem." Maul launches himself off the landing strut. There is no more conversation. What follows is not a duel in the traditional choreographic sense. It is a systematic dismantling. Obi-Wan holds the center of the space and manages Maul's movement, controlling the geometry of the fight the way a conductor controls tempo. Anakin works the edge of that geometry. Every time Maul is redirected by Obi-Wan, he finds Anakin already positioned to answer with a Gemso strike that costs Maul something. A step backward. A guard overcommitted. An angle surrendered. They are not performing. They are working. Maul is extraordinary. He is also, for the first time in his life, outmatched. It takes 6 minutes. The end is not dramatic. Obi-Wan absorbs a Juyo Fury combination that Maul throws in mounting desperation, 8 strikes in sequence, each one harder than the last, and steps through the final overextension with the calmness of a man closing a door. His blade finds Maul's weapon hand. The double-bladed saber hits the floor. In the same moment, Anakin's telekinetic grip closes around Maul's throat from 4 meters away, stopping him completely. Maul hangs in the air. Still, furious, breathing hard. Alive, Obi-Wan looks at Anakin. Anakin holds Maul suspended and looks back. Alive, Obi-Wan says quietly. The word is both answer and question. A pause. Something moves through Anakin's expression. Old, specific. The ghost of a man who once made different choices in pressured moments. His grip releases. Maul drops to the floor. Obi-Wan's stasis hold replaces the telekinesis before Maul can move. Force bonds snapping into place around his wrists, his ankles, his weapon arm. He goes to the Council, Anakin says. They need to see what's coming. What the Sith built. He looks down at Maul the way a man looks at something he recognizes. What they make of their weapons. The Sith infiltrator breathes its cooling engine heat into the silence. Above the lower levels, Coruscant continues its endless, indifferent morning. The High Council chamber at dawn is a different room than it is at midday. At midday it performs authority, the 12 seats arranged in their perfect circle, the light coming in clean and horizontal through the tall windows. The 5 spires visible beyond the glass, like a reminder that this institution has been here longer than anyone in the room, and intends to remain. At dawn the light is amber and low, coming in at an angle that catches the dust in the air and makes the chamber look, briefly, like something that could be mortal. The seats are occupied. Every one of them. Mace Windu called the full session at first light, which tells Obi-Wan everything he needs to know about how badly the previous 24 hours have unsettled the man. Maul kneels in the center of the circle in full force restraints, wrists and ankles bound in bonds that are not physical but are absolute. He has not spoken since the cargo hold. He kneels with his chin up and his yellow eyes moving slowly around the room, not afraid, not defeated, just cataloging, the way a weapon catalogs the space it finds itself in. Waiting, Obi-Wan and Anakin stand to one side. Qui-Gon stands behind them, which is not a thing he was asked to do. It is a thing he decided to do, quietly, without announcing it. And no one on the council has objected, which means either they didn't notice or they've learned to pick their battles with him. A Sith, Mace Windu says. He says it the way a man says a word he spent his entire adult life insisting is theoretical. A living, active, trained Sith. On Coruscant. In a privately held docking bay in sublevel 1313, Anakin says. With a ship prepped for departure and a mission profile that would have intersected with a Naboo diplomatic convoy within the week. Silence. The amber light moves slightly as cloud cover shifts over the planet's artificial sky. You knew where to find him, Ki-Adi-Mundi says carefully. You knew his assignment, his ship's location, his master's name, which you used in the field. A pause. You will explain this. We will explain what we can, Obi-Wan says. Some of what we know cannot be explained in terms the Council would find satisfying. We're asking you to evaluate it by its results, rather than its origins. That, Mace says, is not how this Council operates. With respect, Obi-Wan says, the Sith kneeling in the center of your chamber suggests the current operating model has gaps. The silence that follows has a different quality. Several Council members exchange looks. Yoda, who has not spoken yet, and has been sitting with his eyes half closed in a way that Obi-Wan knows from long experience, means he is paying closer attention than anyone else in the room, opens his eyes fully. Gaps, Yoda says. Acknowledge them, you do not. But exist, they do. He looks at Maul for a long moment, and something in his expression shifts. Something old and heavy moving beneath the surface. Felt it, I have. For years. A shadow in the Force. Present but unlocatable. Assumed divergence. A dark place. Not a person. 2 people. Anakin says. Every head turns. He has not moved from where he stands, still, arms loose at his sides, watching the Council with the specific quality of attention he brings to things he has thought about for a very long time. Maul is the apprentice. There is a master. The master is here, on Coruscant, operating under a public identity that gives him access to the Senate and the Jedi simultaneously. He has been here for decades. He will not show himself through the Force because he is better at concealment than you are at detection. That isn't an insult. It's an accurate assessment of what the last 1,000 years of Sith doctrine has been specifically designed to produce. The chamber absorbs this. You're describing a scenario, Adi Gallia says, in which a Sith Lord has been embedded in the Republic's government structure without detection. Yes, for decades. Yes, and the Jedi Order, she continues, with all of its resources and all of its members and its direct access to the Force, failed to find him. Yes, Anakin says. You did. No performance in it. No cruelty. Just the flat, complete accuracy of a man delivering a diagnosis. Mace Windu stands up. It is not a dramatic gesture, he simply rises, because sitting has become incompatible with what he's feeling. He walks to the window. His back is to the room for a long moment, the 5 spires rising beyond the glass in the growing morning light, and Obi-Wan watches him and thinks, "This is the moment. This is where it either opens or closes. If what you're telling us is accurate," Mace says to the window, "then everything we've built our security assessments on for the last generation is wrong." "Not wrong," Obi-Wan says. "Incomplete. The Sith didn't survive by being stronger than you. They survived by being patient, by letting the Order's own certainty do the concealment work for them. The assumption that the Sith were extinct was the mechanism. It was engineered to be the mechanism." Mace turns from the window. His expression is not what Obi-Wan expected, not defensive, not dismissive, something harder and quieter than either. "How do you know this?" "We have stood where this road leads," Obi-Wan says, and walked back from it. "That's all we can tell you. It will have to be enough." Yoda makes a small sound. Not words, something older than words. A low hum of deliberation that fills the chamber the way a foundation stone fills a wall. "Enough," he says slowly. "Decide we must. If it is." He looks at Maul again, then at the two Guardians, then at something that is not visible in the room but that he is clearly reading with the same precision he brings to everything. "In the Force, heavy, you both are. Old, not in body. In," he searches. "Experience." "Yes," Obi-Wan says simply. Yoda nods once. The nod of a being who has decided to trust what he is sensing over what he can verify, which is the most profound form of trust available to him. "Then speak we must, of the Master you name. Carefully, systematically, and of the Senate." He looks at Mace. "Contacted must be, the Judicial Department." Quietly, Anakin steps forward. One step, deliberate, measured, claiming the room's attention without demanding it. "Before you move on the Master, you need to understand something. He is not a political problem with a Force-sensitive component. He is the most dangerous living practitioner of the dark side in the galaxy. And he has spent 50 years specifically preparing for the moment someone in this room figures out what he is." A pause. "You move on him openly, he vanishes and rebuilds elsewhere. You move on him wrong, people die. Jedi, senators, people you are responsible for. Then how?" Ki-Adi-Mundi asks. "Do we move on him correctly?" "You let us do it," Anakin says. The chamber is quiet. Maul, still kneeling in the center of the circle, makes a sound that is not quite a laugh. It draws every eye. He looks at Anakin with his yellow eyes, and in them is the first thing other than cold calculation he has shown since the cargo hold. Something that might, in another kind of creature, be called recognition. "You've met him," Maul says. His voice is low and certain. "Before, you've stood in front of my Master and you're still here." He turns it over. "How?" Anakin looks at him for a long moment. "He made a mistake," Anakin says. "He thought darkness was the same as strength. It isn't. A beat. You should remember that, when the Council decides what to do with you." Maul says nothing more. Obi-Wan watches Mace Windu's face through this exchange, and sees the thing he was looking for arrive, not certainty. Mace Windu does not arrive at certainty quickly, and Obi-Wan has never respected him more for it than he does right now, but gravity. The specific gravity of a man who has decided that a thing is real, and is beginning to calculate what that reality costs. "We will need everything," Mace says finally. "Everything you know, every detail, every name." He looks at them both. "And you will need to tell us how two men who arrived on Coruscant 4 days ago, with no credentials and a temple account number, know the internal structure of a Sith conspiracy that predates most of the beings in this room." "We'll tell you what we can," Obi-Wan says again. "That answer," Mace says, "is going to get old quickly." "I know," Obi-Wan says, "but it's the only one we have." Yoda closes his eyes again. The amber light has shifted to gold, full morning now, the chamber warming by degrees. "Begin," Yoda says. "We are listening." The operation to identify Palpatine takes 11 days. Obi-Wan had expected resistance. From the Council, from the Judicial Department, from the Senate's own internal security apparatus, which has spent decades being quietly systematically shaped by the man they are now trying to investigate, and has the specific institutional blindness of an eye that has been looking in the wrong direction for so long, it has forgotten other directions exist. He gets resistance. What he does not expect is how much of it comes from the truth itself. Because the truth, laid bare across 11 days of cross-referenced Senate records, financial disclosures, force presence mapping, and the painstaking reconstruction of 30 years of Naboo political history, is not a dramatic revelation. It is a quiet, accumulating horror. Palpatine does not look like a Sith Lord in the documents. He looks like a careful man. A patient man. A man who has never done anything that couldn't be explained two other ways, who has built a career from the strategic application of reasonableness, who appears in the margins of every major Republic crisis for 30 years, as a voice of measured counsel rather than as a cause. The documents don't indict him. They simply, once you know what you're looking for, make him impossible. Anakin is the one who finds the thread that pulls it apart. Not through the records, through memory. Specific, exact, irreversible memory of a conversation in an opera house that hasn't happened yet, of a Sith legend about a master who could prevent death, of the exact sequence of manipulations that turned a grieving young man toward darkness. He writes it out. All of it. Every step. Every pressure point. Every moment where the hand behind the curtain made itself felt without being visible, and hands the document to Mace Windu without a word. Mace reads it in silence. It takes 20 minutes. When he looks up, his face has done something that Obi-Wan has never seen Mace Windu's face do. He's been in this building, Mace says. In council sessions. At temple ceremonies. A pause. He attended the memorial for Master Tevaka. Yes, Anakin says. Mace sets the document down with the careful precision of a man who needs his hands to do something controlled. I want a perimeter, he says. Full council authorization. Quiet, judicial special operations, not Senate security. Senate security is compromised until we know who he's turned. Nothing moves until I say it moves. They move on a Thursday. Senate recess. The building half-emptied of staff, the remaining skeleton crew running on routine, nobody expecting anything to happen, because Thursday in recess is the least dramatic possible context for anything. Palpatine will be in his private office on the executive level, as he is every Thursday in recess, reviewing constituent correspondence from Naboo with the pleasant diligence of a dedicated public servant. Obi-Wan has suggested, carefully and repeatedly, that they bring overwhelming force. Mace has agreed, which is the most alarming indicator of how seriously he is taking this. 6 Masters, both Guardians. A judicial special operations team covering every exit below the 10th floor. Temple guards on the roof. The specific total closure of every route out of the Republic Executive Building that doesn't pass through someone who knows what Darth Sidious actually is. They go in through the main entrance, which Anakin suggested and which seemed counterintuitive to everyone until he explained. Palpatine's entire operational doctrine is built on the assumption that if discovered, he will be discovered in a way that gives him options. A single Jedi investigator, a suspicious senator, a gradual closing of suspicion he can outmaneuver. He has never planned for 6 Masters walking through his front door on a Thursday afternoon. The lobby is marble and Republic blue and entirely ordinary. The turbolift is fast and quiet. The executive floor corridor is empty. Obi-Wan walks it beside Anakin and feels, for the first time since Tatooine, the specific quality of Anakin's presence in the Force shift. Not toward darkness. Not toward rage, but toward something older and more total. The complete, still focus of a man who has been walking toward this room his entire life and has finally arrived. He reaches out, briefly, and puts one hand on Anakin's shoulder. Anakin doesn't look at him, but something in the set of his jaw changes, and Obi-Wan feels the Force between them hum, with a frequency that is neither Anakin's nor his own, but something produced by their specific combination. The braided thread, warm and steady. The thing the cosmic force sent back because it needed both ends intact. They stop outside the office door. Mace looks at both of them. One long look that is, in its own compressed way, an acknowledgement of everything he doesn't know about them, and has chosen to trust anyway. Then he opens the door. Palpatine is at his desk. This is the thing Obi-Wan will remember. Not the fight, not the lightning, not the specific choreography of what happens next. But this, the moment before any of it, when a composed man barely past 50, silver-haired, in senatorial robes that carry 30 years of carefully cultivated authority, looks up from a stack of constituent correspondence and sees 6 Jedi Masters and 2 strangers filling his office doorway, and his face does 3 things in the space of a single second. First, the pleasant surprise of a man interrupted at routine work. Second, the rapid recalculation, the intelligence, the real intelligence, coming online behind the mild eyes, reading the room, reading the force signatures, reading the faces and what the faces mean. Third, and this is the one Obi-Wan watches for, the one that confirms everything, the decision. The exact moment Darth Sidious stops performing Sheev Palpatine and determines that performance is no longer the operational priority. It is a small shift. If you had not spent decades either serving him or studying him, you would not catch it. Mace catches it. Sheev Palpatine, he says, by the authority of the Jedi High Council and the Republic Judicial Department, you are under. The desk disintegrates. Not from an explosion, Palpatine moves through it. The momentum of his leap carrying him over and through the heavy durasteel surface like it was made of something lighter than intention, and the Force lightning arrives simultaneously with his movement, not as an opening statement, but as a distraction, a blinding, deafening arc of pure dark side energy designed not to kill anyone in the first second, but to break the formation. It works, partially. 2 masters are driven back by the initial arc. Obi-Wan is already moving. He steps into the lightning. This is Ceresu's ultimate expression. Not deflection, not redirection, but complete integration with incoming force, letting it flow through the guard rather than breaking against it. The lightning runs across his blade and dissipates into the office walls and ceiling, scorching the Republic blue paint black, and through it Obi-Wan advances, 1 step at a time, eating the ground between himself and Palpatine with the patience of a man who has all the time in the world. Palpatine shifts targets. He always does. He identifies the variable he can't calculate. He turns to Anakin. I can feel. He begins. Don't, Anakin says. He is 4 meters away and closing, and his blade is up in a high gemso guard, and there is nothing on his face that Palpatine can use. No grief, no fear, no anger, no hunger for approval or terror of loss. The emotional landscape that Darth Sidious spent 20 years carefully mapping and cultivating and weaponizing in this man is simply not present. What is present is something Palpatine has no doctrine for. Certainty, without darkness as its fuel. Palpatine launches a force push that would have thrown a normal Jedi through the wall. Anakin catches it in his offhand, bleeds the energy sideways, and steps through the gap. The room fills with sound, the crack of lightning, the constant note of 2 lightsabers and then 3 as Mace's violet blade enters the space, the low structural groan of the walls absorbing more force energy than they were built to manage. Palpatine is extraordinary. He is also, for the second time in 11 days, facing opponents with no fear in them, and fear has always been the variable his power is multiplied by. He finds nothing to multiply with. He burns brighter, more lightning, more raw dark side force, the kind of power that flattened the Senate chamber's entire upper level when he fought Yoda, and Yoda had been alone and tired and carrying grief like ballast in his chest. Here Obi-Wan absorbs it. Mace counters it. The 4 other masters lock the geometry of the room, giving Palpatine nowhere to move that doesn't walk into a blade. And Anakin waits, not with impatience, not with rage, with the absolute inexhaustible patience of a man who has learned, in the hardest possible school, what happens when you move too soon. Palpatine overextends. 1 arc of lightning too many, the body committing a fraction further than the tactical mind intended. The overreach of a being who has never once in his life had to fear being overextended because there was always a frightened opponent to capitalize on the opening instead. This time, the frightened opponent does not exist. Obi-Wan closes from the left. Anakin closes from the right. The office goes quiet. Darth Sidious, Dark Lord of the Sith, architect of the Clone Wars, author of the Galactic Empire, murderer of 10,000 Jedi, and the reason a boy from Tatooine lost everything he ever loved, dies in a government office on a Thursday afternoon, without a final speech, without a meaningful last word, without the dignity of a dramatic exit. He simply stops. Anakin stands over the space where he was, and breathes. In, out. The lightning burns are already cooling on the walls. Somewhere outside the shattered window, Coruscant continues. The six masters stand in the wreckage and say nothing, because there is, for this moment, nothing adequate to say. Mace Windu looks at Anakin, looks at Obi-Wan. "It's done," he says. "Yes," Obi-Wan says. He looks at Anakin. Anakin is looking at his hands. His lightsaber is already clipped back to his belt. His hands are empty and still, and he is looking at them the way he looked at the twin suns above Mos Espa on the first morning, like a man confirming something he needed to confirm. Whole, Obi-Wan thinks. He is whole. He has never seen that before. The office breathes smoke and silence around them. And outside. The Republic continues its Thursday, unknowing and intact. Naboo does not know it was almost lost. That is the first thing Obi-Wan thinks when the transport breaks atmosphere and the planet resolves beneath them. Green and blue and impossibly pastoral, its forests unburned, its cities unoccupied, its people going about the specific, unhurried business of a civilization that has not yet been shown what fragility looks like from the inside. The Trade Federation's droid armies are still loaded in cargo ships in orbit. The blockade has not been declared. The invasion that would have scarred this planet's memory for a generation exists only as a set of orders on a datapad in a Neimoidian commander's cabin. Orders that were transmitted by a man who is now dead in a government office on Coruscant. The orders have not been rescinded. That is why they are here. Anakin sits across from him in the transport's cabin, looking out the opposite viewport at the fleet. It is significant. 17 Lucrehulk-class battleships arranged in a loose cordon above the planet's equatorial band. Their scale making the planet look, from this angle, briefly vulnerable in a way that has nothing to do with military reality and everything to do with the geometry of what it means to have something enormous pointed at something beautiful. "How many droids?" Anakin says. "Per ship, approximately 139,000 battle droids in storage configuration," Obi-Wan says. "Across 17 ships, nearly 2.5 million, Anakin says. He has already done the arithmetic. He always does the arithmetic first. And the Neimoidians themselves won't fight. They'll surrender the moment they understand their patron is gone and there's no one left to hide behind. That's been my assessment as well." Anakin turns from the viewport. So this is a negotiation with a show of force, rather than an engagement. Ideally, and if it isn't ideal? Obi-Wan considers the 6 Jedi Masters in the compartment behind them, the 2 judicial cruisers running escort, the diplomatic credentials signed by an acting chancellor, who spent approximately 4 hours learning about the Sith conspiracy, before immediately authorizing everything Mace Windu asked for. Then, it becomes something else. But I don't believe it will. Anakin nods. Once. And returns to the viewport. Viceroy Newt Gunray receives them in the lead Lucrehulk's command center, because he has, in the 12 hours since Sidious's death, a fact communicated to him through channels so abrupt and unofficial that he spent 6 of those hours refusing to believe it. Been doing the specific kind of terrified recalculation that greedy men do when the powerful patron who made their choices simple, suddenly, stops being available to take the blame for them. He is sweating when they walk in. He is a Neimoidian of middle age and considerable material comfort, dressed in robes that cost more than most Outer Rim settlers earn in a year, and he looks at the 2 guardians and the 4 judicial officers behind them with the expression of a man who has decided that cooperation is survival and is now attempting to perform cooperation so thoroughly that it retroactively becomes his idea. "We had no knowledge," he begins, before anyone has spoken, "of any Sith involvement. Any knowledge whatsoever. The arrangement was presented to us as a straightforward trade dispute resolution through unconventional channels. Viceroy," Obi-Wan says. Pleasantly, Gunray stops. "We are not here to discuss your knowledge of Sith involvement. The Judicial Department has a separate dedicated team for that conversation, and you will be having it with them shortly." He lets that land. We are here for the standing invasion order. It needs to be withdrawn. Completely, formally, with full documentation, within the next 3 hours. Gunray's jaw works. The calculation is visible. The calculation of a man weighing the cost of compliance against the rapidly vanishing list of alternatives. The Trade Federation has significant financial interests at stake. The blockade was contracted. The contract was issued by a Sith Lord using a false identity, Anakin says from beside Obi-Wan, in the tone of someone stating a fact about weather. It's not a contract. It's evidence. The command center is quiet for a moment. 3 Nemoidian aides stand behind Gunray in various states of distress. The holographic display above the central console shows the planet below, blue-green and patient, entirely unaware of this conversation. 3 hours, Obi-Wan repeats. After which the judicial cruisers currently holding position at your fleet's edge will be joined by 2 more, and the conversation will become considerably less comfortable for everyone involved. Gunray looks at the holographic display, looks at Obi-Wan, looks at the display again. 2 hours, he says. He signs in 90 minutes. The withdrawal takes the rest of the day. 17 Lucrehulk Hulk-class battleships are not nimble. They turn slowly. Reconfigure their formations through a long series of sublight adjustments, their running lights shifting from the red-amber holding pattern to the blue-white of active navigation. Obi-Wan watches from the observation deck of the judicial cruiser as they go, one by one, then in clusters of 3 and 4, the great curved hulls catching Naboo's sun as they orient for the hyperspace jump that will carry them back toward Trade Federation space. It is not a triumphant sight. It is a bureaucratic one, which is somehow more satisfying. Anakin stands beside him. They have been standing here for 20 minutes without speaking, watching the fleet dismantle itself at 1.5 kilometers per hour. The last time I saw this planet, Anakin says, it was from a cockpit. I was 9. I accidentally destroyed a droid control ship and ended the occupation. He pauses. I didn't entirely understand what I'd done until days later. Obi-Wan remembers. He was on the ground for that, far below, in the palace generator complex, watching his master die while a 9-year-old boy flew a starfighter into the heart of an enemy fleet by instinct and force luck, and the specific, terrifying competence of a child who doesn't know yet what he's not supposed to be able to do. There was no occupation this time, Obi-Wan says. No. No one had to die for it. Anakin is quiet for a moment. The last cluster of Lucrehulks is rotating now, their silhouettes changing as they turn for open space. The Queen should be told. Officially, Padam, he stops. Corrects. The Queen. She should know what was planned and what was prevented. It affects her planet's security going forward. I agree. The judicial team will handle the formal diplomatic notification, but, Obi-Wan pauses, you could speak with her directly. If you wanted. Anakin says nothing for a long time. Below, Naboo turns in its orbit, unhurried, green and blue and whole. No, he says finally. Not yet. She doesn't. In this timeline she doesn't know me. She'd be meeting a stranger. He says it with the clean, deliberate precision of a man who has prepared this decision in advance and is now delivering the conclusion rather than working through it. Let her have this version of events without me in it. Let her be safe and unoccupied and governing her planet well. That's enough. Obi-Wan does not push. He understands. He has spent 3 days not going back to the corridor by the archive annex, not seeking out Qui-Gon for another conversation that would cost him something he can't afford to keep spending. He understands perfectly. The last Lucrehulk completes its turn. Its running lights go blue-white. A moment later, the characteristic distortion of a hyperspace jump appears at its bow. That brief, tearing shimmer of folded space, and then it is simply gone. The orbit above Naboo is empty. Clean. Obi-Wan realizes he has been holding a breath he didn't know he was holding, and releases it. We should send a full report to the Council. Mace will want documentation before the Senate session. Mace always wants documentation. It's his most Jedi-like quality. Anakin makes a sound that is almost a laugh. It arrives and departs quickly, but it was there, genuine, unguarded, the laugh of a man who has not laughed in a very long time, and is surprised to find the mechanism still works. Obi-Wan looks at him. Anakin is still watching the empty orbit where the fleet was. But something in the set of his shoulders has changed. Some load redistributed. Some calculation resolved. Not peace, not yet, not completely. But the beginning of the direction it grows from. Sky, Obi-Wan says. Anakin turns. Well done. The words are simple. They don't cover what Obi-Wan means by them, the full weight of what it means to say well done to this man, in this life, after everything. But Anakin hears what's underneath them. He always could. You too, Ben, he says. They stand at the observation deck viewport as Naboo turns below them, patient and unoccupied and entirely, perfectly itself. Behind them, the judicial cruiser hums toward the planet's upper atmosphere, carrying paperwork and documentation, and the quiet, undramatic machinery of a catastrophe that has been prevented rather than survived. It is, Obi-Wan thinks, the best possible kind of victory. The kind that leaves nothing to rebuild. The Senate chamber holds 1,000, and today it is full. Not the routine full of a standard legislative session, delegates arriving late, aides whispering in the corridors, the low, continuous murmur of 1,000 simultaneous side conversations running beneath whatever is being said at the podium. Full in the way it gets, only when something has happened that cannot be processed privately, when the instinct of every sentient being in a position of power is to be physically present in the same room as everyone else who holds power, as though proximity might help with the understanding. The floating pod at the chamber center is occupied by Acting Chancellor Masameda, who has spent 6 days looking like a man doing advanced mathematics in his sleep, and has aged approximately a decade in the process. Around him, in their tiered semicircular galleries, 1,200 delegates from 800-member worlds sit in the specific silence of people who have been told something they cannot yet fully believe. Darth Sidious was Sheev Palpatine, the senator from Naboo, the mild-mannered, consensus-building, 30-year veteran of Republic politics, the man who sat on 12 committees, attended 40 years of temple ceremonial functions, and was considered, by the most recent Senate approval survey, the second most trusted public figure in the Republic after the chief librarian of the Jedi Archives. The man who was also, simultaneously, the last Dark Lord of the Sith. Obi-Wan sits in the Jedi Observer Gallery with Mace Windu and watches the chamber try to metabolize this. It is not going smoothly. The first hour is questions. Not the procedural kind, the raw, unfiltered kind that bypass the usual Senate decorum, because decorum requires a shared agreement about what is real, and that agreement is currently unavailable. Delegates from Palpatine's allied systems want evidence. Delegates from systems that opposed him want to know how long, exactly, the Jedi Order knew, and why, exactly, they didn't act sooner. Delegates from the Outer Rim, who have spent decades watching the Republic's institutions serve core world interests, and have very few reasons to trust any of the parties currently explaining themselves, want to know what changes, specifically and in writing, will prevent this from happening again. These are, Obi-Wan thinks, exactly the right questions. Mace sits beside him with his hands folded, and his expression neutral in the way that costs something to maintain. They're going to want a Jedi to address the chamber, he says quietly. I know. It should be you. Obi-Wan looks at him. Why not you? Because when I speak, they hear the Council defending itself. When you speak, Mace pauses, choosing carefully. They hear something they can't entirely categorize, which means they listen differently. This is, coming from Mace Windu, an extraordinary concession. Obi-Wan recognizes it as such and doesn't make him acknowledge it twice. What do you want me to say? The truth, Mace says. About what the Order missed. About why. About what changes. He looks at the chamber floor, where Acting Chancellor Ameda is attempting to restore procedural order with limited success. Don't defend us. We don't deserve defense right now. Obi-Wan addresses the Senate from the central pod. He does not use notes. He does not employ the measured rhetorical architecture of a practiced political speaker. He speaks the way he has learned, over a very long and expensive education, to speak when the situation requires absolute honesty rather than presentation. He tells them what the Jedi Order missed, and why. Not in the language of institutional failure, not the bloodless vocabulary of process gaps and oversight deficiencies, but in the specific, human language of assumption. The Order assumed the Sith were gone because the Order wanted them to be gone. That want was reasonable, historically grounded, and completely wrong, and it functioned for decades as a kind of organized blindness that no amount of Force sensitivity could compensate for, because it wasn't a failure of perception. It was a failure of imagination. He tells them about the Rule of Two, about 1,000 years of Sith doctrine specifically engineered to exploit exactly that blindness, about what one patient, brilliant, utterly ruthless man could build in the shadow of an institution that had stopped questioning its own assumptions. He does not tell them how he knows this, with the specificity he knows it. He tells them what needs to change, oversight mechanisms between the Jedi Order and the Senate that do not run through a single Chancellor's office, independent Force sensitivity monitoring of senior Republic officials, not invasive, not punitive, but systematic in the way that financial disclosure requirements are systematic, an agreed-upon accountability structure that treats the potential for Force manipulation as a known variable rather than a theoretical one, a formal investigative arm of the Jedi Order with judicial independence, answerable to the full Senate rather than to the Council alone. The chamber listens. Not silently. There are murmurs, interruptions, the restless energy of 1,200 political minds processing at different speeds. But they listen in the way that people listen when they sense they are hearing something that cannot be unheard. When he steps down from the podium, the response is not applause. It is a different sound, the low, sustained murmur of a room beginning to think rather than react. Mace, when Obi-Wan returns to the observer gallery, says nothing. He nods once. Anakin is not in the chamber. He is in the Jedi Temple's East Garden, which is small and mostly overlooked and populated at this hour only by a pair of younglings doing a beginner levitation exercise under the distracted supervision of a senior Padawan who is clearly thinking about something else. Anakin sits on a stone bench at the garden's far end and watches the younglings without appearing to watch them. The careful non-attention of a man who doesn't want to be seen staring. Obi-Wan finds him there an hour after the Senate session adjourns. He sits beside him without speaking. The garden is warm, catching the afternoon light from a gap between two towers. The levitation exercise ends. The Padawan gathers the younglings and herds them back inside with the long-suffering efficiency of someone doing this for the 4th time today. The garden is quiet. "How did it go?" Anakin says. "As well as it could have." Meaning badly, but productively. That's an accurate summary, yes. Anakin is quiet for a moment. He has his elbows on his knees and his hands loosely clasped, and he is looking at the space where the younglings were practicing. "I counted 11 during the exercise," he says. "The youngest one, the Togruta girl, she was levitating 2 objects simultaneously without realizing it. She thought she was only doing one. Impressive. She has no idea." A pause. That's the thing about this place. The potential in it. All of these children. He stops. Starts again differently. When Palpatine gutted the temple, when Order 66, he doesn't finish the sentence. He doesn't need to. There were children here. In this garden probably. Obi-Wan says nothing. There is nothing to say that the silence isn't already saying more accurately. "They're safe now," Anakin says. He says it quietly, with the specific quality of a man confirming something to himself rather than announcing it. All of them, the Togruta girl and her 2 invisible objects, and every single one of the others. "Yes," Obi-Wan says, "because we came back. Because we came back." The afternoon light shifts, moving across the garden stones in a slow diagonal. Somewhere inside the temple a bell sounds, the half-hour meditation call, low and resonant, carrying through the walls and the garden and the space between the two of them with the unhurried authority of something that has been marking time in this place for 10,000 years. Anakin lifts his head. "Ben," he says. "Yes, I think it's almost done." Obi-Wan looks at the garden, at the warm stones and the afternoon light, and the small scuff marks on the path where the younglings' boots dragged during the exercise. At the temple walls around them, intact and occupied and full of the specific, irreplaceable noise of a living institution. Nearly, he says. He can feel it too, not as a countdown, not as dread, but as the sensation of a tide that has been running in a particular direction for a very long time beginning, slowly and with great gentleness, to turn. The Force has been patient. It has the particular, enormous patience of something that does not experience time the way the beings inside it do. It has waited through 11 days of investigation, and a Senate session, and a garden afternoon, and it is not finished yet. But it is close. One more thing, Anakin says. One more thing, Obi-Wan agrees. The meditation bell finishes its cycle. The garden settles back into stillness. Above the temple, Coruscant's afternoon sky is the specific pale gold it gets when the light catches the upper atmosphere just right. Not quite blue, not quite amber, something between that belongs to neither category and is more beautiful for it. Anakin watches it for a long moment. Then he stands, and they walk back inside together, toward whatever is waiting in the final chapter of a story they came here to rewrite. Dooku comes to Coruscant willingly. This is the detail that surprises everyone except Obi-Wan, who spent enough time studying the man, as a cautionary tale, as an enemy, as the ghost of a Jedi who decided the Order's failures were reason to abandon it, rather than reform it. To understand that Dooku's greatest weakness has always been his pride. He is past 70 now, the decades worn into him not as decay, but as compression. Every principle, every grievance, every conviction reduced to its hardest, most essential form. He has spent the last decade building a counter-movement to a republic he genuinely, correctly believes is corrupt. Under the direction of a Sith Lord he believes he is using as much as being used by. The news of Sidious's death does not devastate him, it clarifies him. He arrives on a public transport. No disguise, no entourage beyond a single aide who is clearly terrified and doing his best not to show it. He walks through the Coruscant landing terminal in dark robes cut in the Jedi fashion. He had never fully abandoned the silhouette, even when he abandoned everything else, and submits to a judicial escort with the bearing of a man attending a function he organized himself. He is brought to the temple. He asks to speak to the guardians specifically. The room the council assigns is small, one of the temple's mediation chambers, circular, stone-floored, lit by the diffuse light of frosted windows that turn the afternoon into something ambient and directionless. A table, 4 chairs, no recording equipment, at Dooku's request, which the council debates for 40 minutes and then grants because Mace Windu, who has spent 11 days recalibrating everything he thought he knew about his own institution's blind spots, has developed a useful new relationship with the concept of trusting the process. Dooku is already seated when they enter. He looks at them both across the table with the dark, assessing eyes of a man who has been the most intelligent person in most rooms for most of his life, and is genuinely uncertain, for perhaps the first time, whether that is true right now. He is silver-haired, upright, the architecture of a distinguished man wearing age the way some men wear authority, as though it was always coming, and he prepared for it accordingly. His hands rest flat on the table. His lightsaber is not on his belt. He surrendered it at the door. "You killed him," he says. No preamble. "Yes," Obi-Wan says. The council's account says 6 masters and 2 guardians. He looks between them. But that's not how it happened. The council's account is accurate, Anakin says. Dooku looks at him for a long moment. The same thing Maul did in the cargo hold. That involuntary, instinctive recognition of something familiar in Anakin's quality of presence that can't be sourced or named. "You're not guardians of the wills," he says. "That identity is a convenience." "Most identities are," Obi-Wan says. "Who are you?" "People who knew what Sidious was before this investigation began," Obi-Wan says. "People who came to Coruscant specifically to end what he was building. Beyond that," he pauses. "It doesn't serve either of us for you to know more." Dooku absorbs this with the stillness of a man who has learned, over 7 decades, that pressing for answers you can already see you won't receive is a waste of the time you could spend on something useful. He turns the available information over, examining it from multiple angles, and arrives. Obi-Wan can see the moment he arrives. at the partial understanding that is all he's going to get, and decides it's enough to work with. I built the separatist movement, Dooku says, on legitimate grievances. Taxation structures that benefit core worlds at Outer Rim expense. Senate representation formulas that effectively disenfranchise 70% of the Republic's inhabited systems. Judicial access weighted toward member worlds with the resources to navigate it. He says it plainly, without defensiveness. None of that stops being true because the man who helped me organize it was a Sith. No, Obi-Wan agrees. It doesn't. Dooku looks at him sharply, not expecting agreement. The grievances are real, Obi-Wan continues. Sidious didn't manufacture them. He found them, cultivated them, and planned to use the conflict they generate to consolidate emergency power in the Chancellorship. The cause was legitimate. The use he intended to make of it was not. A pause. That distinction matters. It's also why you're sitting in this room instead of a judicial holding facility. Dooku is quiet for a moment. Something moves in his expression. Not gratitude. Precisely. But something adjacent. The recognition of being seen accurately, rather than conveniently. The Council wants the separatist leadership, he says. The Council wants the conflict prevented, Anakin says. The leadership is a means, not an end. Dooku turns to Anakin. He has been doing this periodically throughout the conversation, returning to Anakin with the involuntary frequency of a man whose instincts keep flagging something his conscious mind can't identify. You're very certain of the Council's intentions for people who operate outside their authority. We've spent time with them recently, Anakin says. They're capable of learning. When sufficiently motivated, something moves across Dooku's face that might, in better light, be almost amusement. Qui-Gon said something similar to me once. 30 years ago. He looks at the table. I should have listened to more of what Qui-Gon said. The room is quiet. Obi-Wan lets it be quiet. He does not fill the space. He has learned, at great cost over a long time, that some moments require the silence to do the work rather than words, and this is one of them. Dooku is not a man who needs to be convinced. He is a man who needs to finish convincing himself. And that is a process that cannot be rushed or assisted from outside. What do you want from me? Dooku says finally. The separatist command structure, Anakin says. Names, positions, the financial network that funds the droid army procurement. Everything Sidious helped you build, turned over to the judicial department with your full cooperation. He pauses, in exchange for which the Council advocates for a full Senate hearing on Outer Rim representation reform. Not a committee. A full hearing, with binding resolution authority. Dooku looks at him. You have the standing to demand that, Anakin says. You have 70 years of Jedi credibility, a legitimate political movement with genuine constituent support, and the cooperation of the Republic's judicial apparatus to offer as a bargaining position. Use it. A beat. The right way. This time. The silence that follows is different from the ones before it, not the silence of resistance or calculation, but the silence of a man looking at a door he didn't know was there, checking whether it's real. Qui-Gon would have said something like that, Dooku says quietly. He is not speaking to either of them. Exactly. He always believed the Order could be reformed from within rather than opposed from without. I decided he was naive. He looks at his hands on the table. I wonder, sometimes, he wasn't naive, Obi-Wan says. It comes out with more certainty than he intends. Dooku hears it and looks at him with those sharp, assessing eyes, and for a moment Obi-Wan feels entirely transparent, seen through completely by a man who spent 40 years as one of the Order's finest minds, and has had nothing to do for the past decade, but observe people carefully. You knew him, Dooku says. Not a question. I studied his teachings, Obi-Wan says. Which is true. Which is not all of what is true. Dooku holds his gaze for a long moment. Then, with the deliberate movement of a man making a decision he has been circling for the length of this conversation, he straightens in his chair and folds his hands with the formal precision of someone signaling that the part of the meeting that was personal is over, and the part that is practical is beginning. I want the hearing guaranteed in writing, he says. Full Senate floor, binding resolution, within 90 days. 72, Anakin says. The political momentum won't hold past that. Dooku looks at him. Decides, 72 days. Done, Anakin says. They look at each other across the table, Dooku and Anakin. Two men shaped by the same darkness from different angles. Sitting in a Jedi meditation chamber in the afternoon light, arriving, by entirely different roads, at the same destination. One more thing, Dooku says. He looks between them both. After this is resolved, after the hearings, the structural changes, whatever comes next, will you still be here? The two of you? Obi-Wan glances at Anakin. Anakin is looking at the frosted windows, at the ambient afternoon light coming through them, at something that isn't in the room. No, Obi-Wan says gently. We won't. Dooku nods slowly, as though this, too, he already knew. Then I hope, he says, that wherever you're going, it's somewhere that deserves you. He stands. He extends his hand, first to Obi-Wan, then to Anakin. His grip is firm and brief and completely without theater. He walks to the door. He stops with his hand on the frame and does not turn around. Tell Qui-Gon, he says quietly, that I'm sorry it took me this long. He leaves. Obi-Wan sits in the mediation chamber and looks at the empty chair across the table and thinks about doors that open in the final hours of a long story, and what it means that this one did. Beside him, Anakin exhales slowly. One more thing, he says. One more thing, Obi-Wan says. The afternoon light holds them both, steady and warm, in the quiet center of a temple that is, for the first time in a very long time, exactly what it was always supposed to be. The Senate passes the Outer Rim Representation Reform Act on a Tuesday. Not unanimously. Nothing meaningful ever passes unanimously. Because unanimity in a body of 1,200 delegates means someone's objection has been silenced rather than resolved, and silenced objections have a way of compounding into larger problems down the road. It passes with enough votes to be binding, and enough opposition to be real. Which is exactly what a functional democracy is supposed to look like, when it is functioning. Dooku's testimony before the full floor session runs 4 hours. He is precise, exhaustive, and entirely without self-pity, which turns out to be the most persuasive register available to a man asking an institution to take seriously the concerns of the people it has been failing. The Core World delegation bloc spends 3 weeks trying to procedurally delay the vote. They do not succeed. Mace Windu, who spent 30 years on the High Council treating political engagement as a thing the Jedi Order did reluctantly, and at arm's length, discovers during those 3 weeks that he has strong opinions about Senate procedure and no remaining patience for the performance of neutrality on questions with clear moral weight. He testifies twice. Both times he is so precisely, forensically correct that the opposing advocates stop trying to rebut him and start trying to change the subject. It does not work. The bill passes. The chamber records it. The galaxy continues. The institutional reforms take longer. The independent Jedi investigative arm is chartered within 60 days, slow by some standards, blindingly fast by the standards of an order that has been debating its relationship with the Republic government since before most current council members were born. The Force Sensitivity Monitoring Framework requires a full year of negotiation between the Council, the Senate Civil Liberties Committee, and 3 different advocacy groups representing non-Jedi Force-sensitive communities, and emerges from that process considerably more nuanced and better designed than any version the Council would have produced alone, which Obi-Wan suspects was always going to be the point. Young Anakin Skywalker is formally admitted to the Jedi Order on a morning in late spring. Qui-Gon takes him as a Padawan the same afternoon, which the Council objects to on procedural grounds for approximately 6 hours before Mace, who has developed a new and useful habit of asking himself what the right answer actually is, before asking himself what the Council's traditional position is, quietly withdraws the objection. Shmi Skywalker is given a position in the Temple's administrative support staff, not charity, not a courtesy arrangement, but a genuine role that uses the organizational competence she developed over 9 years of managing Watto's parts inventory under conditions of enforced undercompensation. She is, within 3 months, indispensable. The Temple's procurement records have never been more accurate. She has a small apartment 2 levels above the youngling's wing. Some evenings, young Anakin eats dinner there instead of in the main hall, Adult Anakin watches all of this from the periphery. Not because he is excluded. The Council has extended every courtesy, every access, every resource available to two men who prevented a Sith conspiracy and a galactic war in the span of 3 weeks. But because the periphery is where he can see it most clearly. From the center of it he would be in it, part of it, and what he needs right now is not to be part of it. He needs to see it as it is, independent of his presence. He watches young Anakin in the temple corridors, easier, now than the first day in Mos Espa, the initial raw wound of it having settled into something more bearable without ever becoming something simple. The boy is happy. Not the guarded performance of happiness that a child in difficult circumstances produces to protect the adults around them, but the real thing, unself-conscious, slightly chaotic, expressed primarily through the destruction of training remotes at an unprecedented rate, and the accumulation of a social circle that includes, by Obi-Wan's last count, 1 Padawan, 3 younglings of various species, 2 temple maintenance droids who have been reprogrammed in ways that technically violate 12 safety protocols, and Qui-Gon's personal meditation cushion, which young Anakin appears to have claimed without asking. Qui-Gon knows. He has said nothing. Obi-Wan, when this is reported to him, makes a sound that is very close to a laugh and takes a long time to compose himself. There is an afternoon, late summer, the temple gardens full of the amber light that comes at the end of long days, when adult Anakin is sitting on the stone bench in the East Garden and young Anakin comes through at a run, chasing something that turns out to be a training remote he's modified to operate outside its prescribed boundaries, stops when he sees the stranger, and looks at him with a direct, unfiltered appraisal that 9-year-olds apply to everything, because they haven't yet learned to pretend assessment isn't happening. Adult Anakin meets his gaze. Young Anakin tilts his head. "You're the guardian," he says, the tall one. "Yes. Master Qui-Gon says you're leaving soon." "Soon," adult Anakin agrees. The boy considers this with the gravity of someone for whom leaving is a concept loaded with specific, personal weight. "Where are you going?" Adult Anakin looks at the garden, at the afternoon light on the stones, at the small scuff marks on the path, the same ones that were there when Obi-Wan pointed them out weeks ago, and that will probably be there for years more. Refreshed by each generation of younglings who don't think to lift their feet. "Home," he says. Young Anakin seems to find this satisfactory. He looks at the escaped remote, which has drifted into a corner of the garden and is bumping gently against the wall, confused by the boundary. He looks back at adult Anakin. "Someone very wise once told me," adult Anakin says, and then stops. Smiles, lets it go. "Never mind. Take care of yourself." Young Anakin squints at him the way children squint at adults who start sentences and don't finish them. Then he retrieves his remote and disappears back through the garden door at speed, already reconfiguring something on its casing with a tool he definitely should not have on his person in a garden. Adult Anakin sits alone in the afternoon light for a long time. He does not make a sound. He does not need to. They go back to Tatooine for the last night. Not for any tactical or logistical reason. There is no reason that would satisfy someone asking for one. They go because it is where they arrived, and because the Force has a shape that prefers completion to efficiency. And because when Obi-Wan suggested it, Anakin said yes immediately, and neither of them felt the need to explain further. The desert at night is a different world than the desert in the day. The twin suns are gone, and in their absence the sky opens completely. Stars from horizon to horizon, unobstructed by atmosphere or city light or anything that civilization puts between itself and the universe to make the universe more manageable. They sit on a dune outside Mos Espa's light radius, and the galaxy is simply there, enormous and available, the way it only is when there is nothing left to do. Obi-Wan feels it first. Not a departure, not a loss, the opposite of that. A warmth in the Force that is familiar in the way that the smell of a place you grew up in is familiar, recognition preceding memory, the body knowing before the mind catches up. The cosmic force, patient and enormous, turning its attention toward them with the specific, unhurried quality of something that has been waiting for a task to finish, and is now at last receiving the confirmation that it has. "Is this what it felt like?" Anakin says quietly. The first time. Obi-Wan considers this. The moment on the Death Star. The deliberate stillness of it. The choice. It was faster the first time, he says. This feels, Kinder, Anakin says. Yes, Kinder. The desert breathes around them, the night wind moving over the dunes in long, slow pulses. They are not afraid. This is the thing worth recording, the thing that makes this moment different from every other ending either of them has experienced. There is no fear in it anywhere. The Force is not taking something, it is receiving something back. There is a distinction, and the distinction is everything. Anakin turns to look at him. In the starlight he looks like himself, not the armored shadow, not the ghost, not the broken thing at the end of a second Death Star, but the man who walked out of a Jedi temple as a Padawan and became, through catastrophe and grace and the specific, unrepeatable alchemy of loving someone for 30 years through every possible configuration of joy and damage, his brother. No one had to die for this, Obi-Wan says. Not really, not the way it did before. Anakin looks at the stars. No, he says. They didn't. He reaches out. Obi-Wan takes his hand. The light begins quietly, not blazing, not sudden, but arriving the way dawn arrives, which is gradually and then completely. It comes from inside them and moves outward, warm and very clean, the specific quality of light that has no shadow in it, because it was never generated by anything that cast one. Below the dune, in Mos Espa, a boy looks up from a piece of circuitry he is repairing by lamplight, drawn by something he cannot name, and sees a shimmer in the sky above the desert, brief, bright, there and then not there, and feels, without knowing why, something that will stay with him his whole life without ever resolving into a memory he can locate. He smiles. He looks back down at his work. The desert holds its silence. The galaxy, saved not by prophecy, or destiny, or the grinding machinery of inevitable fate, but by two men who loved each other across every possible version of their lives and chose, when given the chance, to spend their last chapter getting it right. The galaxy turns on, patient and enormous, carrying forward into a future that no longer needs to be survived. It only needs to be lived. Let us know what you'd like to see next. The end.